think it's for a couple of reasons. I think there was a very conscious effort on the part of Jews in Western Europe as part of the Enlightenment, as part of modernization, to intellectualize. And we got really good at intellectualizing. And we're very good at ideas to begin with, but we really emphasize that. And like much of the rest of Western civilization, we kind of didn't pay attention to the rest of the body and the emotions. It took a while for us to get there. I think also there were undoubtedly, I would call them Jewishly indigenous spiritual practices, meditations and chants and other things that were part of the Hasidic movement, and were destroyed, that were lost in the Shoah, in the Holocaust. So I think for both of those reasons, that's a big part. Yes, I mean, you know, the phenomenon, especially among survivors, I mean, you had people, there were so many different responses. You had some people who, you know, tried to just run as far away as possible. And then you had people who really, you know, it brought them deeper into their faith and their life. And so there's a whole range of responses. Yeah, there's a whole range of responses, I think, and so I'm not surprised, you know, to hear that. And look, at the end of the day, the people who are going to share Judaism with other people are going to be the people probably who find it joyful, right? If you find it to be a burden, you're not likely to share it with other people. So those of us who are, you know, more in the Jewish joy business, I'd buy that stock. You know, I think that's a long-term hold. You know, yeah. Examples of hypervigilance, I mean, you read about them, you know, or experience them. I have people who aren't able to sleep, people who are always worried about, you know, I've got to have my go bag ready, people who are constantly, if you're, you know, right now, constantly checking the news, you know, and like, what's going to happen, as though my checking is going to have any influence on what the, you know, what's actually going on. It's just increasing my, you know, anxiety levels. So I think those kinds of examples and lots of others, you know, that people who genuinely suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, or genuine PTSD, there's lots and lots of those kinds of examples. In terms of responding, you know, as I said, I think you have two populations that are obviously profoundly traumatized, and in both in Israel and in the Palestinian territories. And you know, the first thing is that the first and last thing in some ways is that everybody has to figure out a way that we can put down the weapons and stop killing each other. That would be good. You know, you have to create safe environments. I mean, what does it create? I think as Tirza Firestone said, it's a feeling of you don't have a safe place in the world. Well, if nobody feels like they have a safe place in the world, we talk about safe spaces. You can't show up. If you don't feel safe enough to go to sleep, much less have a conversation with someone who you worry is going to kill you, you know, there are preconditions. And so it's a very, very long road. And if I talk about the dismantling 2,000 years of anti-Jewish hatred in Western civilization over the last couple of generations, you know, imagine trying to do that. Frankly, the Arab-Israeli conflict is in many ways a shorter conflict than that, a much shorter conflict, but a much more recently violent one. And so, yeah, I'm not in that business specifically, but I believe it's a very long road to hoe. Yeah, Wise Aging. Wow. Okay, we got a real groupie who's out there. Wise Aging was a book that was written by one of our founders, Rabbi Rachel Cowan of blessed memory. You should buy it. It's a fabulous book, and it's about wise aging. And out of that, our organization actually created a program for people to essentially discuss the book, practice the practices that she outlines in the book. And before the pandemic, before I came on, we weren't able to continue supporting it in quite the same way. Right now, it's basically available for you can buy the book, you can certainly gather a group of people to talk about it, and we're hoping that we can, we're looking into ways that we might be able to get back in that business. I'm the first to say, if your level of anxiety and depression is so debilitating, right, that it's actually impacting your life in a very serious way, you need therapy. Like, that's not something that meditation practice is necessarily going to help you get out of. What I found is that what's been documented is that mindfulness practices and spiritual practices can be very, very helpful upstream, right, in terms of protective factors for having greater built-in resilience that might protect against anxiety and depression further down the road. But if you're already there, this is not necessarily the tool that's going to get you out of it. And it's a tool, I should say, like, these are tools that work together. It's not like you pick, I'm going to do meditation or I'm going to do therapy. A lot of us do both. So I think that they all have their uses for sure. Yeah, and that's what I would say. This is one of the great challenges of teaching Judaism and teaching Jewish history, is how do you hold it and hold it lightly and not be consumed by it. And again, that's, I think, in short, it's resilience. So I think there's so much, and this is again where I find, the language of mindfulness practice can be really, really helpful, is to notice what's happening in my body, to notice what sensations and emotions I'm experiencing. And there's a very basic and useful tool, which is to say, and I'm not those emotions, right? My awareness is actually separate from those emotions, and I have a choice. I may be feeling, for very good reasons, a lot of fear right now. I still have a choice about how I want to behave, how I want to respond, and is that how I want to respond? So with the Exodus is easy enough at this point. We got a lot of historical distance on that one. It's easy enough to spiritualize that. The Holocaust is very, very hard to spiritualize for any of us who, even for those of us today who didn't grow up, who may not have grown up with relatives who survived. It's still extremely close. And so I think, you hold that very differently, but it also leads me to be very careful, and maybe this is an example of the kind of response that I worry about. It's 1938, right? How many times do I see a response to an anti-Semitic event, to a real instance of anti-Semitism, and say, it's 1938, meaning, we're on the eve of the Holocaust. And I would just invite us to pause for a second and really ask, is that the message we want to send? Is it true? Is it helpful? These are the Buddha's 5 questions, right, for mindful speech. Is it beneficial, right? We need to ask ourselves those questions, and maybe it is true. And if so, we can say that. But if it's just a knee-jerk reflective response, I'm not so sure that that's so helpful. This is such a live question also because of the media environment that we live in now, where the way that collectivity operates, and we're subject to memes and messages and the ways that headlines are written, and we need to pause for a moment, I think, as individuals, and just allow ourselves to ask. These are basic critical questions that we try to teach kids, I think, these days in media consumption. who's writing this headline and why? Who's creating this message and why? What's behind that, right? And not to just take everything necessarily as a given in those messages that are being put out. At the same time, what's dangerous about that, right, of course, then is everybody's got their own version of the news, and everybody's got their own version of facts. And I was talking with Bishop Curry and one of his friends earlier today, and we were talking about, somebody can, post that this is, a chair, and 100,000 people will believe it. And so that line between acknowledging what we collectively know to be true and also at the same time being vigilant about what might not be true and how people might be trying to manipulate the story. That is itself is anxiety producing, and yet another space in which we need to practice, I think, a mindful approach where we don't drive ourselves crazy. This is a particular preoccupation of mine about how to listen to the news without going crazy. And I think it's very important for Jews and it's very important for everybody. So maybe that can be another talk another time. But. Well, I think the whole notion of creating binaries is useful for a lot of different forces that want to exert control. And the either or in putting people into camps, that's definitely a strategy that takes on a life of its own, and it can be consciously or subconsciously manipulated. And I think that there's some other reasons why these days on the political right we see more movement towards nationalism, racial identification, dividing along those lines, and it leads to some hyper-Jewish nationalism in the case of Israel, which is dangerous and terrifying that we have ministers, and I'm not an Israeli citizen, that there are ministers in the Israeli government who represent that view is horrible. And there's a language that's developed. I have a long history in higher education, as you heard. Worked about 15 years in higher ed, have a PhD. Recently published an article about this with the Hartman Institute. That part of what's happened, that seems to have happened in the humanities and social sciences in particular, is a real sort of collapsing of everything into a power and powerless sort of binary. It's the who is oppressed, and if anybody who is viewed to be oppressed is automatically the more virtuous, and that often is a conversation stopper, because while clearly my whole religious mission is about helping to overcome oppression, it can never be as simple as just, in this current moment, what looks like it's happening. There's also there's a larger context as well, and we need to be mindful of that. The Blue Square ads that was Stand Up to Jewish Hate. That was funded by Robert Kraft, who owns the New England Patriots. And has been very philanthropic in trying to combat anti-Semitism in the last several years. And they ran ads, during the Super Bowl. They had a big checkbook. We didn't have a similar checkbook. So our ad, I think, was probably seen by nobody or very few people. It was just on those 600 TVs, in select airports, for one ad on a game between the San Francisco 49ers and the Arizona Cardinals. It was you had to be really watching it in the airport at that time. So then, I wrote an article, an op-ed about it, and we got it out in the Jewish community, and more people saw it that way. So it's apples and oranges. The interesting part to me is that I haven't had anybody come to me and say, what would you do with $10 million? Could we blow this ad up? Yeah, let's tell this story. Yeah. And still, It's good that they're making upstander ads. I don't want to knock that down. Like that's really what those ads have been about, those blue square ads have been about, is like stand up to Jewish hate. And it's about the non-Jewish neighbors who see the graffiti on the garage, you know, et cetera. How they can help to stand up and say, we see you and we support you. And that's really, really important for folks who are, you know, non-Jewish allies of Jews. And wouldn't it be awesome if there were some like really because honestly, when most people think of positive images of Jews, they probably are still thinking of Fiddler on the Roof, and that was 1964. I mean, like, dude, we're due for an update, you know? The first thing I would say is do check in with your Jewish neighbors. I think there were a lot of people who, after October 7th, felt like, and a clear rise in anti-Semitic incidents and rhetoric on both the political right and left. This is one of those times where it's incoming from both directions. People were feeling like, and nobody's standing up for us. You know, like there's all these other groups that seem to be getting attention, and that's great. But you know, remember, I mean, Jews, this is where the racial politics get really complicated, right? Ashkenazi Jews like me, we code as white. And we don't have the same story as a lot of other white people, right? And this is a moment when we feel not in the majority at all, and we feel like a persecuted minority, which we have been in virtually every iteration of our historical existence, right? So when you feel that stuff triggered, it's like, boy, I would really, really love it if some of my non-Jewish friends might just check in and like, hey, how you doing? I think that's really, really important. I think also it's so important right now. Again, I think there's some real malign actors who are taking advantage of this and stoking it, starting, I will say, with, I think, the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is not to say the people of Iran, but just the government. I think that there's been a lot of stoking of conflating whatever the actions of the Israeli government or the Israeli military might be with the Jewish people. And just, you gotta call bullshit on that. Like that's just not, that's not okay. And also to also keep a critical eye on, I think what's just so important, the people in the Middle East, the people in Israel and Palestine who I have the greatest respect for on both sides, are the people who are aware that nobody is going anywhere. Neither of these people is leaving. So like, stop it already, right? Like, can't we just, I mean, it's like, can't we all just get along? It's not as simple as that, obviously, but please just remember that. Like, nobody's going anywhere. The notion that, like, Jews go back to where are we supposed to go back to? You know? Supposed to go back to the woods of the Ukraine? No. Just remembering that and holding that anytime you see the news, and you have, you know, those critical feelings, not to allow those sort of absolutizing things to happen. I mean, because just apply the same logic, then most of the people who are here, we should also all get up and leave, because this land certainly didn't belong to us, right? So I think if you can, those of you who are not members of the Jewish community, to be good allies is just to you know, care about your Jewish neighbors, check in with them, and remember that just like everybody else, we are, you know, human beings who are struggling and making our way through and want to be good neighbors.
Chautauqua, please join me in thanking Rabbi Josh Feigelson.